The day had turned into a silent night. Shen Yi is a 23-year-old young man with short dark hair. He wears ordinary everyday clothes without the frills of branded clothes. He shuffled along the road. He's just a tough otaku who just dropped out of school to do an internship. The internship is actually a part-time job in a cafe. A young man leaves and gets angry. Why was he forced to stay in the cafe all the time? So he is in charge of cleaning. Does he look like a rude idiot? All the time he regretted that he went to work in this cafe and dropped out of school. If he had known that things would turn out like this, then he would have still attended school and studied properly. He can find a prestigious and decent job, and he won't have to cheat in games. While he was walking and thinking about his wrong decision to drop out of school, suddenly a beautiful red-haired girl stopped him. The girl wore a Playboy bunny costume that accentuated her figure. Shen Yi flashed a stupid and ravishing smile that made his nose bleed. He kept staring at her breasts and told her that she was most likely confused with someone. She held his chin with her graceful fingers and told him that he didn't need to pretend to be a fool, because today he will give him a discount for his services, and only take 300 yuan, which can be in cash or credit card, as the young man decided. And then your Shen Yi can have fun with him and do whatever his heart desires. When he heard the price, he suddenly straightened up and hinted and said that he was definitely not at the right address, because he was just a poor student who didn't have a single penny behind his back, which surprised the girl because she was sure she had money. Shen Yi, who had turned his back to the girl, went straight to the stairs to his small apartment. He was happy to go home because in a moment a courier would come with his food. A young man in a yellow uniform wearing a helmet with kangaroo ears was coming towards him. Turns out he was a courier. They happily turned to each other. A messenger called Shen Yi. He was an extraordinary man. He said with genuine joy that he brought him McDonald's, so Shen Yi should be happy to take his order. But Shen Yi told the courier that he ordered KFC and not McDonald's, which disappointed both of them, the courier youth and Shen Yi himself. Shen Yi continued his journey and pondered that the intelligent and attractive life ability could be tampered with naturally, but after 20 years of life, Shen Yi realized that his physical data was nothing, and they confused everyone when he got to his apartment. He heard someone talking in the dialogue. It was unusual, because it didn't seem to be among ordinary people talking about worldly topics. While the door to the apartment was locked from the inside and did not open, Shen Yi realized that behind the closed door, Shen Yi saw a young man whom he called a child was watching a movie called Internal Affairs No. 2. This film, according to him, was not for little brats, so he should watch something that suits him, namely Pleasant of Goat, which is good for children. Shen Yi pulled the door handle but didn't give up because it was stuck. The young man was angry why every time the door jammed, which made it difficult to enter the apartment. While he was making fruitless attempts to open the door, light bulbs started flashing sharply in the corridor, and he was plunged into darkness. Shen Yi started to hear a voice behind him which frightened him greatly, but he tried to convince himself that it was just a hallucination. He felt nervous and heard a voice saying bad things. Those words are like Lord Ashes. We ask for offerings. It was like asking for things like blood, bodies, and witches. At first, Shen Yi thought that it was a hallucination, but eventually he rejected the idea of the hallucinations and thought that ghosts were starting to haunt him, because his residence is an old, dilapidated building. Shen Yi said that ghosts make mistakes with their victims, and then this sound was heard again. But a louder voice said that a great man should appear who should bring fear to the whole world. Thunder flashed across the sky, and a crow screamed somewhere. The whole action is transferred to some ancient temple where there are people in red robes and a man also in red robes sitting on the throne, but with a crown. The crowned man said that they were offering sacrifices to the mighty Lord of Ashes. The victim was young, white-haired girl with red eyes. His gaze was frightened, and he asked not to kill him. He made his request, and his request was not heard by the people in red. In the darkness, Shen Yi kept hearing voices like asking to reveal your majestic figure, arousing fear in the world. Emerge the majestic figure of the star-shattering Lord of Ashes. They offer flesh and blood witches as sacrifices. Someone asked to embody a great person who would plunge the whole world into fear, and a portal appeared on the floor, which meant that the sacrifice summon had been successful. Which means someone will show up. Now the man with the crown doesn't believe in this, and tears came out of her joy. He was very happy that the Lord of Ashes would soon come to them all. The red-robed person shouted a summons. Everyone shouted the word, came in unison, and the terrifying lightning flashed in the sky again. Everyone who sacrificed started crying with happiness, but they consider themselves worthless and unimportant. Humans who couldn't linger and observe the appearance of the Lord of Ashes. So the pious disciples went away and left the girl alone. The huge creature appeared in front of the roaring girl. There was too much smoke in the room, from which a black-haired young man came out who turned out to be Shen Yi. He didn't understand where he ended up, and how he turned to the ghost that was talking to him. And then he saw a girl on the floor. He lay unconscious, because of the fear that had bound his body. The girl was beautiful, even though she was wearing a hideous black shirt that reached the middle of her thighs. When Shen Yi saw it, he said that there was a very beautiful ghost in front of him, which was why his nose started bleeding again. After looking closely, he realized that the girl in front of him didn't really look like a ghost. He was a little pale, but still the one who approached him and realized that he was tied up. He removes the rope from her and asks her to get up as she looks sick. The girl who opened her eyes immediately knelt in front of him and called him the great Lord of Ashes, as an indescribably majestic and extraordinary being. Shen Yi said that the girl was wrong and it was all about her physical data. Because of that, he is always confused with someone. He is an ordinary person. But the white-haired beauty did not hear this, because this white-haired girl kept delirious and said that Shen Yi was dignified and great. It's beyond the physical description. The delirious girl kept repeating that the person standing in front of her was an indescribably powerful demon king. He did not see Shen Yi as he actually saw him, instead of a boy in front of him. There are monsters with 3 hands on each side. He was 2 or 3 meters tall. The demon had 3 arms of sharp stone spikes sticking out from its back. Devil D has no eyes. Instead, he has a fiery light in the center of his face, and his mouth is filled with rows of shiny, razor-sharp teeth. He still doesn't understand who she is talking about, and asks her if she is sure that she is talking about the man sitting across from her. The girl, who was too excited, fainted. Shen Yi thought he scared her, so he fainted. He thought the nest was to blackmail him. He decided to calm down. The girl comes down with a cup of coffee, so he took out his thermos in a cup while the young man poured the coffee. He thought in parallel that he read a lot of manga and watched a lot of anime, so he wouldn't be surprised if he really entered another world and became a hitman. The girl opened one eye and looked at him. Shen Yi came to the conclusion that it was most likely that he was faking it and did not actually faint. But he folded his fingers and brought them to his chin. Make a thinking face. The young man thought that no matter what, he would not be blackmailed, and the girl actually looked in front of him. Not a boy, but a demonic creature. He asked not to be afraid. He gave her a cup of coffee and asked her name. The young girl sitting across from him couldn't believe he was having a dialogue with such a powerful being. Like the white mist that envelops the world, the Lord of Ashes destroys the stars. She appears before the Almighty, and her name is Aina. Shen Yi heard the demon's long name and decided that he could play along with Aina. She was barely afraid of him anymore, and held out a cup of coffee because she saw things differently. Then in front of him was not an ordinary coffee cup, but a rock cup with bubbling lava. And Aina thought that in this way the demon lord took the lives of his victims, the girl who decided that her days were numbered. He said that he was ready to give him words about scaring Sacrifice and Shen Yi. He asked the girl who she was and what she called him. He takes advantage of her position with a serious look and asks her to answer honestly, otherwise she will be punished. A frightened Anna began to explain herself and said that she was just a victim who was used to call a servant whose life belonged entirely to her the Lord of Ashes. She just couldn't fool him. So he was telling the absolute truth. Shen Yi, after listening to him, came to the conclusion that he was in another world, where there is a mysterious evil church organization that uses living victims to summon a demon king called the Lord of Ashes. But instead of a devil, they called him an ordinary man. Then a whirlwind appears, indicating that the call is complete. He tells Aina to listen now and carry out his orders. He told him to proceed properly and carefully. He wants her to be happy and live for herself. In order to cherish his life, Shen Yi and the person of the demon king disappeared. And his words rang a bell in the girl's head because no one ever told her to live. No one values his life. He was told all the time that his life was meant to be sacrificed. She should be proud to be a victim. Aina started crying because of the demon king's words and vowed that she would live to obey his will. And Aina's grand mission has a taste of life and still has the coffee cup in front of her that was given to her by the demon lord. He believed that this was a gift from him. He thought about what had just happened. The Ashes Chaos sequence has always advocated the service and summoning of the Lord of Ashes, but they couldn't summon him for 1,000 years. Did God come because a young girl was sacrificed? He took a cup of coffee. When for him appeared in the form of a stone bowl with bubbling lava and left the church. It's raining outside, but the rain doesn't fall on Aina because the bowl with the lava forms a ball. The girl admired the fact that the rain had not fallen on her and what had happened to her a few minutes ago. He has lived in an orphanage all his life and has never had the right to leave alone. And today he finds himself in a big city for the first time. Could this be the gift the Lord of Ashes gave him? First, walk alone. Aina walked along the streets of the city of Beiland, which is the capital of Nolan and one of the largest cities in the world. He walked through the city. He saw an unusual place with a non-trivial sign for places with coffee written on it. Shen Yi fell from the portal and didn't understand where he fell, hit his head and lost consciousness. He woke up the next morning. The young man understood that he was in a cafe, but he felt that the atmosphere and energy were different from those on Earth, so it's very likely that he's still in the world of weird cults with weird churches turning his head. To the right, he saw a large poster on the wall depicting a blonde-haired man with a strange sort of manic smile. Maybe he is a cafe owner, or a star who has been here. Looking at the photo, he didn't notice how a girl came into the cafe. He told her to make him a cold latte, and the other person asked to make 2 espressos. He was mistaken for the boss depicted on the poster. He decides to spend time at the cafe so he can work, hoping he will be hired. The customers who come to the cafe are most often beautiful and attractive girls who are sure to please Shen Yi, so he works harder. But there is also a strange personality who offers strange ways to pass the time. Night fell on the street, and the boss didn't come, and Shen Yi wanted to get paid for his work. So he stayed at the cafe for the night, because it has water, food, and bedding in it, which he received as payment for his work. At the same time, the black-robed people headed towards the church where Dr. Norn was. They will carry out a reform operation in which Aina will play a major role. He was placed in the underground operating room. They arrive at the appointed place, and Norn says that she and Aina need to talk alone. So he asked the wards to provide him with the necessary materials for the operation. He asks to leave the burning blood that the hooded man guarantees. He said that he would be very surprised and happy that he was in a vessel filled with blood. Dr. Norn and Aina entered the operating room and asked the girl to lie down on the operating table. Aina's arms and legs were tied tightly with rope so she wouldn't get out. If anything happened and everything went well, because the dress was worn on a girl with long sleeves. Dr. Norn tore off part of it so he had full access to the elbow compound and veins to inject the anesthetic. He said that as soon as the medicine he injected him took effect, the reformation process was about to start. He opened a container filled with bubbly blood, which turned out to be the coffee that Shen Yi gave to Aina. Norn is stunned, as this is the first successful sacrifice in years. He couldn't get enough, and then it hit him that the sacrifice worked. When Aina fell victim, did the Demon King really like a young girl with silver hair and red like blood eyes, and she herself was blonde with blue eyes? He was worried that he would not like the demon he had attracted himself. Together, taking a deep breath and turning to Aina, she told her that she must become a child of God. Aina didn't quite understand what he was talking about, so she was going to forgive him and to clarify or explain to him that the child of God didn't exist, means true descent from the divine, but only a form of repentance in the ashes of chaos in which they both exist. God, in the order of the ashes of chaos, is an injection of burning blood, thanks to which the body of the chosen one mutates and acquires superhuman strength. Norn tells Aina that the reform operation can easily be carried out in the church, but they came to the hall for the spectacle. She explained to him that everything was being financed by people not far from here, in the villa, and they want to see the burning young blood. The man said that the mortal body is always weak and dull because it deteriorates with age and is prone to death, which is absolutely disgusting, and in the opinion of everyone wants to be a child of God. But with luck, this chance fell to Aina. He would be the first to surpass them, surpassing all of humanity in all aspects of development. He will be the first son of God. Norn tells Aina she knows what needs to be done and injects her with boiling blood that spreads like red spiderweb all over her body. The girl brought discomfort and terrible pain. Bloody tears started to flow from the girl's eyes and blood flowed from her mouth, and he himself screamed angrily and fainted from the exploding injection. Aina is unconscious after the injection, and Norn thinks that she was not chosen, and they made a mistake with the person who could be the child of God. But then the girl came to her senses and said in a low voice that the Lord of Ashes told her to live and she had to fulfill his holy will. At the same time, Shen Yi was in the cafe, which reflected that since he was still in this cafe, it was likely that he wouldn't meet Aina again. He didn't want to have anything to do with that scary, mysterious, dark church anymore. He believed that they were not a serious organization, because Aina is bad and the weirdest. Shen Yi sat quietly in the room. Suddenly, in his opinion, he began to believe in this version, until he heard another voice chanting a new summoning spell. Shen Yi heard the sound, realizing that he was being called again, and with a silly smile, the magic beauty named Aina will be there. Thinking about it, he brushed his hair back, took a breath, and relaxed, preparing for the portal to appear again, but then suddenly the words disappeared and the calls stopped. He realized that he didn't want to go there. However, the young man suddenly had a pain in his heart which caused him to twist, and he fell exhausted. He assumes that this happened because he was pretending to be some kind of god, which is why he feels so bad. The heat in his chest moved to his hands. They start to glow, and Shen Yi suggests that he can even emit fire from his hands. After burning with this idea, he spat out the words. According to Tao Senshi-san, which is a mantra in Japanese, after the incantation he shouted the word fire, and a huge pillar of fire actually shot out from his hand which could burn down an apartment. So he asked the flames to stop saying, showing that he was blown away by his new skill. And he started to indulge himself by letting the fire out. Then stop doing it. He presents himself as a hero. What's the show like? And talking to himself, talking to a certain person. Alice, and asks him in Japanese if he has seen what he is capable of. He continued playing with fire and decided to test how strong he was, and whether he can give the tribe the shape he wants. He tried, and he really succeeded in providing fire with various letter shapes, and even a girl named Alice. Shen Yi came to the conclusion that he possessed an extremely fierce flame, but still not fierce enough. There were a lot of books in his room, and he decided to burn a couple and hide them. No one would notice anyway because there were so many of them. He chose a red book with gold designs on the cover, and amplifying it, the fire became great, and it seemed that now the room in the book would burn. But to the young man's surprise, the book remained without a burnt page. He was angry because he did not understand how fire could be so weak. He couldn't even burn this old book, but just a waste of time. At this time, Dr. Norn left the operating room. Where is he with Aina? He pondered that it would still not be easy to recreate a divine child. The guy decided that next time they would choose some beautiful blue-eyed girl who would be somewhat like him as a victim. And with Anna, it will be possible to use again. Then the door of the operating room opened with a small stream, and Anna came out from there. He spoke to Norn. He said that he managed to take the blood boil. Norn turned to him with surprise in her eyes and ran over to the girl sitting on the floor. He was glad he was still alive, because that meant they had successfully held the ceremony. While Norn frantically rejoiced, Anna had a thought in her mind, that the chances of him surviving were so slim. But Anna survived thanks to the great Lord of Ashes, because he was born to the mighty Lord of Ashes. Norn asks to tell the high priest to start preparing for the next ritual. It was raining outside, and Shen Yi was in the cafe wearing an apron with a picture of Alice, her favorite YouTuber. And he's making latte art. After the first call since then, a lot of time has passed. The boss never came to the coffee shop either, so while the young man had nowhere to go, he decided to stay at the coffee shop, even though this wasn't his cafe. He still considers himself an important person in this institution. He wanted good coffee and even took advantage of it. It's about a barista he likes, and he even aspires to become the real boss of this coffee shop. But after much thought, he came to the conclusion that he really wanted to go home. He hadn't been home in a long time, and managed to get bored because the people he loved were still there. He took an angry sip of coffee, puts the cup on the table, and shouts for Alice to be returned to him, so that he doesn't get bored and sad here again. There are sounds that carry words that are completely incoherent with each other, like stop the enemy across the shore and deception. Shen Yi heard these words and was already lined up with the thought that he was summoned. But then the words stopped and his voice faded, leaving her alone with herself. He couldn't believe that this failed summons was so short. He closed the coffee shop and went to bed. Before going to sleep, he thought out loud that he had moved here for a month already, and he still hears calls that he counted about 7 different times. He's not like that compared to not working. The first call was successful. He asks the little girl, but in the next successful call, he finds a group of evil cultists. They could understand that he wasn't the real demon lord. Then they would definitely kill him. Rumors in the coffee shop were brought to Shen Yi that there was even a university here, which pleased him, as that meant there were lots of beautiful girls in it. His thoughts about the beautiful woman were interrupted by the voice that appeared again, which made the phone call sound like this was endless suffering. The source of all deception, haters' trouble. Lord of the Ashes, destroying stars, show your prowess here. A portal appears that attracts youth, which means the call was successful. There was terrible thunder and lightning in the street, and not only people in robes gathered in the church, but also elegantly dressed people. In addition to suits and dresses, they wear masks that hide their eyes. The main goal is to collect as much money as possible from these arrogant people. He didn't really believe the girl's words. The high priestess hid within him. But thanks to her, no natural disaster or something terrible had happened yet. Some terrible, wild disaster. Ina listens to the date and suggests that he is talking about relics. Relics are magical objects that have incredible power. Ordinary people were forbidden to come into contact with the relics, and it is provided by wealthy investors who come to see the sacrifices. The high priest began the sacrificial prayer he requested to show the Lord of Ashes his greatness and power, but nothing happened. There was a dead silence in the church. They couldn't even hear the rain. Impossible in 1,000 years, the Lord of Ashes had descended upon them only twice in history. Aina senses that God will come down now and greet her here. A portal formed on the altar from which a powerful demon came out and looked at them. Everyone in the hall was happy. The devil roars in the church. The robed people looked at the god with disbelief in their eyes. They saw it in person for the first time in their lives. Aina was really happy, because he was happy to meet the Lord of Ashes again. They ordered him to lift it, and the devil let out another roar, and the high priest asked him to calm down and apologized for the fact that they brought trouble with this summons for pulling him out of bed. Shen Yi, who appeared as the Lord of Ashes, smiled awkwardly and said that everything was fine, and he's not mad at anyone. but instead he felt a little embarrassed, with an attitude towards him. Everything is calm. Even though Shen Yi was getting ready to sleep, suddenly he was called. He hoped he would not be found here. Among the crowd were men wearing black suits and robes. He saw someone smiling at him. He noted that she was wearing cool clothes this time, namely a black dress with a gray-red patch on the front. Shen Yi was pleased with the cult style. She also noticed that he had a healthier and more pleasant complexion compared to the last meeting when he fainted a lot. The high priest tried to understand what the Lord of Ashes was saying, but he didn't hear anything because his voice was too low. He thought that now the devil would start to get angry after all. The high priest did not answer the Lord of Ashes with silence. It is heard that he made the priest hope that his guilt would be forgiven, and he would be punished by burning in a sacrificial fire. Starting from the high priest, turning to the great Lord of Ashes, he informs him that they have prepared Anhalta treasure for him, the face of endless change. All these words were shouted by the supreme priest, and Shen Yi did not understand why there was a need to shout, and why not calmly say it. The young man looked around at everyone, and noted that the high priest looked like a serious person, and it was better not to joke with him. He decided not to approach the cult. Otherwise, if they exposed it, there would be very sad consequences for him. All the cult followers were so worried that they even started crying to the high priest, who was crying because the demon king didn't answer him. And he thought that he was angry. He was worried that he had met God for the first time, and that he would soon fall under retribution. Shen Yi realized that they had not noticed the change and started to dialogue with them. He calls them stupid commoners and says he accepts their sacrifice. He took a mask from the altar, which acted as a guarantee that the sacrifice was accepted. To everyone's surprise, the high priest wept with joy and realized that his life had been saved. He looks like a loyal follower of their cult. But everyone wondered why, after accepting the sacrifice, God did not leave but was still with them in the church. The high priest believed that God descended once every few thousand years, and whenever something grandiose should happen, it seems this time he comes to contemplate how he can control the whole world. He decided to clarify his guess. So he turned to the Lord of Ashes, who destroyed the stars. She screams at him that they will support him, hoping the whole world will do it and move by his rules. Aina, hearing this, turned to the high priest and told him that all the people gathered in the church were not reliable believers. The high priest angrily shouted at Aina and told her to shut her mouth, because he is an incomprehensible orphan from an orphanage carrying nonsense. And crap. Terrible Shen Yi heard this, pretended to be angry, and the demonic creatures in the church became angry. Dust and flames rose. He was angry that the girl was abused. Although he did not deserve such an attitude, he has to live his own life because he has his own destiny and mission, and the priest should not interfere in his life, so that he will punish them. He raised his hand and flames erupted from it in the shape of a fiery dragon. The demon king asked them if they heard his words, if they counted against them. The high priest turned in fear to the Lord of Starry Ashes, and with a tremor in his voice, said that he was his humble servant who treated him with all parity and respect. Shen Yi, in the form of the Lord of Ashes, told them that he would watch over them, but for now he was back in his world. He forbade them to offer sacrifices to him, and thus making my prayers, hearing his words, conclude that he wasn't as angry as everyone thought. Anna is confused by the fact that God is not as bad as he describes. And when he represents him, of course, when he shows up, some kind of disaster happens, but most often, this was due to the fact that people were unable to accept his powers, which means he's not evil at all. Aina thought that the Lord of Ashes was not an evil god. People are just weak, that's all. The high priest hears the rain and says that since the sound of nature is now heard, it means God has gone. And then all the cult followers rose from their knees and shouted angrily. Here Dr. Norn quickly ran to the church in a hurry and asked what happened to the people and why they went crazy. But the high priest didn't answer him, but only said that everything needed to be sorted out because the energy filled with the appearance of the Lord of Ashes became greater. And now the anti-magic bureau is coming because of this. He said that there are some investors in the church, but they can also be influenced. and started going crazy. This could turn into such a big problem that the doctor screams and demands that the high priest explain everything. The high priest's eyes will flash with purple fire, and he orders Dr. Norn to kneel down, and he immediately sits mourning the fall to the floor. He was angry with himself for not being able to keep his mouth shut, and condemned the actions of the high priest for whom he was now paying. The high priest spoke to the migrant doctor. He wanted to say one thing that was very important to him and all members of the sect. What he wanted to say was related to Aina. Aina heard that about him. He smiled coyly and started killing that only he could understand the great Lord of Ashes, because he was born for him to keep muttering. And then the high priest came to him and asked him to get up from his knees. Dan got up and approached the high priest, who in turn started saying that he was the one chosen by the mighty Lord of the Ashes, her meaning that everyone is obliged to treat her with the utmost respect, and he will be her mentor. He said that Aina has an important mission to help the Lord of Ashes to rule the world, everyone, and reach the absolute power he possessed. Aina caught fire with this idea, and the mission agreed. A week later, a strange man with long brown hair and sharp features came to the coffee shop where Shen Yi worked. He pondered the power of the Demon King. He said that the breath of the mighty god of Ashes was so strong, so that it can distort reality, and it is impossible to breathe air. He compares the Lord of Ashes for fun with a young man who works as a barista, because a powerful aura emanated from him. The young man thought that his name would appear to the client, and asked him what he would like to drink. The man did not expect that the young man would approach him. He quickly replied that he just wanted black coffee. When Shen Yi went to order, the man also reflected that the young man had a strong smell and energy like the devil of Ashes himself. The strange man did not understand who Shen Yi was. Was he really here to stop it? The young man was happy that a visitor had finally come to the cafe. If not, business hasn't been going well lately, and if there are no more visitors, he will be sleeping on the street. He awkwardly thought that the hungry Lord of Ashes couldn't pay the bill and was sleeping on the street. It was hard to imagine what those cultists would think if they find out. Shen Yi had made the order come to the diners, and he looked at her. He was stunned because there was no air left in the room at all. He became extremely heavy due to the energy the young man was emitting. The man put a cup of coffee in front of him and drank it straight away. Shen Yi asked him to be careful because the coffee was hot, and he can burn. The man drank coffee for the sole purpose of thinking that it might contain poison, and decided to check for its presence in this way. On the table where the man was sitting was a jar containing 1,000 paper cranes. Shen Yi noticed this, and kindly asked who the 1,000 paper cranes were for. Visitors say her daughter made this crane because she always dreamed of a story of 1,000 cranes. He smiled at the young man, and he continued to listen, because the man touchingly said that when he had more time, he would like to make more cranes. But sadly, his dream will never come true again, because that girl is no more. He went on to say that this crane was a memory he would cherish forever. He heard this. Shen Yi apologized for his curiosity. The man said he could understand her pain. He understood what it was like to lose a loved one and then lie in an apathetic depression, and do nothing but you have to move forward because in the end, despair will kill the sufferer. But the man said that some things were not released until the end. They are unforgettable. Also, he was also still wondering who the barista guy was. It was an occult priest or a person from the Magic Bureau, but he didn't care who he was. He wouldn't do it, and he couldn't stop it. But Shen Yi smiled kindly and continued the dialogue about how one overcomes loss. The man finally decided that the barista had no ill will towards him. So he said that their meeting was pleasant, and he called his name Brian Anhalt, and Shen Yi said that his name was Shen Yi. Shen Yi said goodbye to him and asked him to come more often. Brian deduced that the young man was from a faraway land because of his communication style. He was only stepping out when a barista approached him from behind, which scared him. But Shen Yi came only to remind him that he had not paid for his order. Brian Anhalt paid for the order and left, and was so calm in his heart. He came to the conclusion that the man was good and he was not evil, and also he doesn't have any bad intentions. He left thinking that he would easily kill the Lord of Ashes and make it a victim waiting at the transition to another world. His face was distorted by a grin of anger and his eyes turned purple. Tonight, with the help of a witch, she will summon the inviolable god and revive her beloved only daughter. Shen Yi took one of the books in the room and started reading it on page 233. Words about the Lord of Ashes, starting from the Lord of Ashes having a body like a python. The huge python that formed the wings lit up and the Sami emitted a boundless stream of fire. The time interval is midnight, and he himself personifies the number 0. It is usually assumed that he is immersed in dreams and is a god outside of this world. It is believed that there are more positive gods in this world. The world's interest in him was not that great. After reading this part of the book, he looked up from the book and noted that it must look like a manual or a novel. After he finished reading this book, he decided to find and check other books for information content about the Lord of Ashes. He finds a book in which the names of the Lord of Ashes are shown in a white mist from across the town's shore. Colorless City. The ancient spirit door to empty dreams witnessed primordial chaos and a number of other names. Amongst many things during his travels, the young man faces unimaginable misfortunes in his life and work. The gambling he loves is all kinds of failures. At this point, his mind was inflamed. A fate-changing ceremonial novel while reading a book. He decided that the ceremony was worth holding because the ritual techniques described in the book were not complicated. It was necessary to pay for pasting rows of bright yellow paper on all 4 sides of the writing desk. On each sheet of paper, one name from the book. And on one sheet, Shen Yi had to write his personal name. After that, it is necessary to scroll through the table several times and read the spell from the book. After the incantation was recited, Shen Yi needed to take a sheet with his name on it. And on the second day, at the same time, he collected the scraps of paper. After that, he needed to wait for the night in the cemetery. No matter what happens, Shen Yi thought, how could he get through all this? And the rite is connected how many names associated with this person. He sat down and thought that maybe the next few days would be full of dangers. After the second summon, the control area has increased, but sadly not as strong. But it's only good for scaring someone. On the table was a mask that Shen Yi took from the altar in the church. The mask makes the high priest stronger. But in the hands of the most ordinary and unremarkable man, he's using it wrong. He tried it, but nothing came out and he threw it away. The mask was thrown to the floor and started falling through it. And then Shen Yi decided to use the mirror to try again. Because the mask falls into the shadow, which means it can change the appearance of the person wearing the mask that he wears on the mask. In the mirror and change her appearance now. He looks like Brian Anhalt, whose facial expressions are completely identical to the real one. He decided to continue his experiment and assumed that if the face changed, then it would most likely work with body shape and with clothes. The theory turned out to be correct. Because he can dress up in a superhero costume, he is happy, because his dream has come true. Here is another voice calling, but the words of the call are different. From previous cultist summons, these summons are different, which means that the gods are summoned in different ways. The one who made the call was Brian. He uttered a call that is considered one of the most ancient that has existed since the dawn of human existence. The calls that people use can give a person any knowledge he wants, but only in exchange for sacrifice. Brian doesn't care about what might happen to him. Because of an encounter with the only devil, his goal is to resurrect his daughter. And she wouldn't give up when the room he was in was filled with fog, where bright blue symbols appear that form words in which questions are addressed to Brian. What's wrong is written, and with an expression on Brian's face he smiled. Because God is unconsciously a guest. Is the sacrifice for the sacrifice of a huge creature hidden in the fog is still a little scary. So that Brian said that he was the lowest person, who can see the face but only the muddled heart. And then an answer appeared in the air again. That man was relatively right. Shen Yi, on the other hand, believed that the man's words were kind, because this is the most standard answer. Brian went on to say that he made sacrifices to rule over all the great things that filled the world. He asked to fulfill his wish to bring his daughter back to life. Shen Yi, hearing Brian's request, recalled their meeting at a cafe, and came to the conclusion that he is not evil and his mind is not bad. But somehow trying to fulfill his desires is dangerous, and he needs to find another way out. Shen Yi said he accepted the sacrifice from a stupid and weak human. The man replied that Brian Anhalt had prepared well. To draft the man in turn was surprised by the power of the god, because he was stronger than he thought, but he still asked to be given the opportunity to resurrect his daughter. Shen Yi watched this picture and noted that the man standing in front of him truly loved his daughter, but sadly he didn't have the power to resurrect his daughter. In the book of origin of the Beyond World God that he had read recently, it was written that all beings on earth were divided into 8 types, and they are differentiated into light, beauty, sword, soul, cup, caste, awakening, and winter. What cup means is serving Lord Ash's intent. Cup is a criterion of fertility and feast, the meaning of lust, forgiveness without return. He will give his own food as a tribute. White heavenly fog is an outer god whose meaning is awakening. Awakening is the criterion of birth and analysis. It rejects the existence of old-fashioned minds and dispels our indifference. He will give obedient knowledge, opening awareness that can be a reward or a punishment. Shen Yi decided to reward Brian with knowledge, but those who do not exist in this world. The young man believed that if a man wasn't aware of the power of the Lord of the Mist, except in the awakening of girls, then he was most likely not very intelligent. Brian Anhalt didn't understand why the Lord of Ashes didn't answer him. It was the sacrifice he brought was not enough. But then an inscription appeared in the fog to make the wish come true. What he needed to do was study deeper and more mysterious knowledge. Shen Yi started to say some strange words that his faming has a fish named Kun. The great Kun is unknown how many thousand are in it, but turns into a bird named Peng. Pan has a huge back unknown how many thousands in it. Brian seemed to understand what was being said, and he was enlightened by the realization of what had been said. And then the inscription that dispelled the shackles appeared. In autumn, the soul and body are not homogeneous, but only disliking. From the earthly guru, the shame of the body can give the spirit everything, and removing fetters is forbidden knowledge. Brian's goal is to gain not only the resurrection of his daughter, but also to gain eternal soul enlightenment. In this case, chaos and war are possible, or even worse. The whole world was about to fall apart after showing that man the sight of Shen Yi starting to disappear and telling him that he was done with hope. That the lesson she taught Brian was visions of chaos and destruction, learned by Brian himself after. Listening to some sort of instruction from the Lord of Ashes deduced that the removal of the shackles would allow an era to break through, which will eventually make people wallow in their own curse. The man considered himself the chosen one because only he was given knowledge about how to raise debt. Shen Yi returned to the room after the summons. He lands in a superhero pose with one knee holding his head up in an epic manner, and said that he was no longer a rookie. He was summoned for 50 minutes, which was significantly longer than the previous 2 times. It's also interesting that this time he's summoned not as the Lord of Ashes, but as the white mist from the other shore. Shen Yi wanted to know if there would be another call. After that, Brian was somewhere in the castle, and he might be able to resurrect his daughter. In the end, Shen Yi was also able to take a photo of the place he was called, and regretted that he didn't think to take a photo twice. Previously, the young man decided to check if he had acquired any new abilities. He threw his hands in the air and nothing happened. Even the flames have not increased. But the mask turned out to be a very effective attribute. He began to consider the things Brian had brought him, as a sacrifice as a great god outside the universe. The type of Shen Yi that can drag this corpse is not the style of a good person. He decided to keep the magic egg the man gave him and then sort out its purpose. In the middle of the night, while Shen Yi was sleeping, the back of the egg box fell down, and a huge creature vaguely similar to a mantis appeared out of it. He saw a young man lying on the bed and started to examine him. With a confused face, she stared at the man and wondered if he was the Lord of Ashes here. Shen Yi suddenly turned on the fight, which scared people, and the strange creature ran out into the street, where he turns into a cute gray cat with white spots. It's raining outside. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood in the rain. He was hiding under an umbrella from the wet raindrops. He had silver hair bangs falling over one eye covering it. He also had a beard with a scar down one side that extended from his mouth to his ear. This mysterious man's name is George. He is one of the 7 null category investigators. The so-called categories are categories of investigators dealing with critical situations. George is the object of admiration for newcomers to the Anti-Magic Bureau. They are secretly called legendary investigators. But he is only human. He comes to check on the cafe, which raises questions of the case the man is taking on, this time as serious as possible. He had the highest degree of secrecy regarding all of this, regarding the arrival of the demon god, where the worst result is the destruction of all living things. In his hand is a photo of Ina walking on the road and protected by a ball. He went to the cafe where Shen Yi worked and ordered a cup of latte. After hearing the order, the man smiled and asked the guests to sit down while preparing drinks. The man watched the man and concluded that he was truly a simple person, who posed no threat, meaning that his investigation was useless and his power was wasted. Shen Yi brought ready-made drinks, and George began to question him and asked if anything unusual had happened recently. The man stepped back and said that the most unusual thing that happened was that there was no one in the cafe because the weather was nice outside, and there were almost no visitors at the coffee shop, which made him sad. After a while, the investigator left and said that the coffee made by the barista was very good, and the man said he would be happy to see him again. After George left, Shen Yi breathed a sigh of relief and came to the conclusion that the man was just an ordinary person, and he was too worried because the visitor looked so scary. Shen Yi felt coldness in his body, which meant that his strength had not recovered. After that, he called out and concentrated, and now his body disappeared and became like steam. What he liked more than flames was that this power could be used to escape. Then the cafe door opened suddenly, and George was behind it. But Shen Yi quickly figured out the direction and was about to return to his main residence. George headed towards the young man and said that the smell of the devil was clearly felt in the cafe. It was an extremely terrifying power. The powerful aura of a demon shook and surrounded the entire cafe compared to that kind of aura. George was like a small boat in an agency, and then Shen Yi awkwardly smiled, offering him another cup of coffee, which the investigator agreed to. Shen Yi asked him to wait until he left to get the required materials. He quickly dashed into the room, where she started to panic because she thought the man saw what she was doing. He was so panicked that his head was spinning. George, who was waiting for him at the cafe, thought the barista didn't leave because of the ingredients for making coffee. But he himself still felt the lingering heaviness of the demonic aura. Hiding behind the desk, he noticed Shen Yi's phone and decided to rummage through it to find any possibly useful information that could aid in the investigation. First, she opened the gallery, where she found 1,000,000 photos of cats, and even after scrolling lower, she found the one the guy had taken as a draft. Investigators carefully examined the photo and realized that it was taken from a place of prayer. He could see the array used to perform a summon from looking at the photo in Shen Yi's cell phone gallery, and the man was determined that he had to go there and see for himself. Meanwhile, Shen Yi returned. He apologized for being late, but the cafe was surprisingly empty. The man searched for recent visitors with his eyes, but found none. He was certain that he was really gone. After all, George found the place captured in the photo on the young man's phone. He entered this room and felt the breath left by a huge extraterrestrial, leaving a powerful monster appearing in front of him. In the mist previously left Shen Yi's house and turned into a cat. A monster called Burning Chaos Seed attacks investigators. George used his weapon summoning technique, and a knife appeared in his hand with which he attacked the monster. But the monster did not die but was only injured in the head, and therefore he fled from the place of call. It was from the escaping monsters. Investigators say that as long as it exists, they will be hunted down and eventually destroyed. He attacked the monster, sending out many summoning swords, but his efforts turned out to be in vain. He concluded that his technique was not powerful enough to destroy a creature of this level. He walked in the rain, thinking about the chaos caused by the chaos seed. The investigator remembered that he was from the Lord of Ashes clan. But judging from the traces left at the summoning place, it seems to be white mist from across the shore. George decided to write a detailed report to the senior officials of the Anti-Magic Bureau. Due to the danger level, people from the cafe will be designated as untenable people. 2 months later, Shen Yi developed his powers. He sent his fire into the street and everyone in a cafe caught fire, with a flame range of around 300 meters. While through him, Shen Yi could freely hear the voices of passers-by, because it can be heard clearly in his head. Following the flames, he decided to practice a little with the cloud mist, but the fog is too weak. Shen Yi needed to create cloud fog instantly, but only when he could achieve the effect in real battle. Shen Yi believed that if the misty body decreased or increased, it would make more sense. He stood up and checked his strength. In one hand he held a flame, and the other passed one ability mask, and the other attacks 2 completely different kinds of power. The young man decided to finish his training and went to the room, where, after a relaxing bath, he went to sleep while lying on the bed. The thought crept into his head that the mysterious George had not come to the coffee shop in the last few days. Things weren't going well, so he hoped that George would come back and things would improve beforehand. When the investigator came, Shen Yi told him some stories from the world. Where did the man himself come from? George always had a stiff expression on his face, which meant he was interested in the man's words. Shen Yi liked investigators because it meant that he had another mysterious friend in this world. But there is still a fear that his identity will finally be revealed. Then, they would open a hunt for him, so he would probably need more help from George. Shen Yi, after falling into a dream, saw strange pillars in it, where everything turns to ashes. Maybe this is the territory of the Lord of Ashes. He looked at Ina, who was standing and not moving, not even blinking. The guide is judging by his pose. He was completely asleep, and he decided to squeeze his cheeks to get a closer look at her face. The young man raised his head to notice that the column was starting to disintegrate. So Shen Yi concluded that the dream didn't seem to last long, because for the first time in 2 months, she had such a dream. But first he had to wake up. He said goodbye to Ina. From history here, all the action is transferred to Ina, who awakens and summons the great Lord of Ashes. Before he went to bed, he used the disembodied technique he had recently learned to try to contact the Lord of Ashes, and he succeeded. Then suddenly he felt a burning pain in his back area. Where is the seal given by the Lord of Ashes displayed? It was raining outside. Shen Yi, who was in the coffee shop, thought about his recent encounter with Ina. He noted that he was not face to face. But he had seen her 3 times, but each meeting was in a strange way. But it's much better than accidentally meeting in real life. Luckily, they and the horrible cultists don't know where he lives. Because if they have this information, then their peaceful life will end. Then the door of the coffee shop opened, and a visitor in a black hood came there. There, the barista greeted him. They met eyes, and Shen Yi started to get nervous because the girl who came in turned out to be Ina. He turned away from her and asked if she wanted to order something and get a drink. Shen Yi didn't understand how he ended up in the coffee shop. How did he know that she lived here, and also managed to get here? Because they definitely can't meet face to face. Maybe this cultist has special hypnotic abilities or something. Yang Shen Yi decided to hold it in and start his performance. She tells him that she has been waiting for him. And now, he's finally here. He thought that he had appeared in front of him twice, and to meet the god of space. What he believed in this way must be shocking and exaggerated. Unbelievably, Ina didn't understand what this young man was talking about the man telling him that he didn't expect such a quick discovery from his existence. He says that he can ask any question that interests him, But the girl didn't understand and said that she had nothing to ask her, and there is nothing to tell him. He checked it and saw no malice, or mean to him. And Shen Yi noted that the girl looked tired and offers a cup of coffee. But Anna said that unfortunately, she doesn't understand coffee, and do not quite understand how to choose it. The young man said that in this case, a vanilla latte would suit him, because this is the most profitable option, if he focuses on her age and she agrees. While the barista prepares his drink, the girl examines him and notes that the man she doesn't recognize looks like they've met before. And Shen Yi in turn thought that pensive expression on his face, caused by the fact that he saw a god in front of him that was not actually the case. The girl felt that the burning was distorted in the heavy aura of the Lord of Ashes floating in the coffee shop, but he didn't understand who the man who made his coffee was. Shen Yi brought him a drink. Ready to Wear takes him to the table and says that he should probably be surprised why he is here. The girl only said that she felt the majestic aura of the Lord of Ashes, and that was how Shen Yi realized that the girl did not recognize him as a demon god. He had a very strong smell of the Lord of Ashes on him, but he didn't know how to get rid of this aura, so he decided to continue pretending. But at the same time, he noted that it was too difficult to claim the title of Lord of Ashes if he had to stay at the coffee shop every day. Today, because of this, it will be difficult for him to maintain the image of a demon god. Aina obviously didn't know about the identities of the two, so he can pretend to be God's messenger conveying God's instructions. Aina in turn tasted the drink she wanted. He really likes it because it is sweet and cool. Then there was a towel flying over the girl's head, and the man told him to dry his hair because he was soaking wet. He begins to tell her that the Lord of Ashes is constantly watching everyone, and then in the middle of his words, the coffee shop door opened. It was the same George, who hasn't been in a cafe for a long time. He enters, but the investigator looks like he wants to leave as he is covered in blood. And Shen Yi decided not to. Let George and Ina meet by all means. She smiled and greeted George and said it was nice to meet him. George said that the barista was smart and had guessed 100, that he was an investigator from the Anti-Magic Bureau. Their organization was responsible for protecting human civilization, but the investigator was like a ghost on the front line. People who heard the man's words said that the work investigators do is very dangerous. George said that today he came to the coffee shop to ask a man for help. Shen Yi agreed to listen to the man, but only after he'd had some coffee and calmed down a bit. The barista quickly backed away from the room where the investigator was. He decided to send Ina away and approached her from behind and asked if she was from the order. And the mark on his back started to burn. Ina says that the order is going through difficult times now because they are faced with a silent prophecy from the deadly pursuit, so he wanted to summon the great Lord of Ashes. Shen Yi said that the Lord of Ashes had no problem overcoming any prophecy. He knows what happened. He can safely believe in a mighty great ruler from the ashes. He didn't need to be afraid of darkness and chaos. It's time for prosperity. And he didn't understand what the barista meant, but said his words were really inspiring. Shen Yi continues his tirade and says that the Lord of Ashes is watching Ina closely and doing what should happen. And now it was time for him to return to order, and the girl left. The man went back to George's room and said that she was ready to discuss the investigator's request. The man asked for help finding the person with the photo, for it most likely depicts a member of an order whose cultic power seriously threatens the stability of the state, and therefore the Bureau for Combating Magic must eradicate this threat, for the common good. The photo turned out to be Aina, which surprised Shen Yi. Shen Yi said that he would help find the girl in the photo if only to meet this girl in person. George stuck to his words that there was a girl in the photo because the person in the photo looked very blurry. It was impossible to understand whether it was a boy or a girl. Besides, the investigator didn't tell him about the girl, so he was surprised by the man, and he still made sure that he turned to the right people, and that young man was very smart. George thanked the man for agreeing to help and asked what the question cost. It was Shen Yi asking for his help rather than money. But investigators didn't like this idea, since he didn't want to be obligated to a mysterious stranger, so he decided to give him some gifts as payment instead of some service. George said goodbye and left Shen Yi, who was starting to have a headache from the day's boredom. According to him, he was in the middle of a huge whirlpool. It was sunny outside, and there was a young girl with medium brown hair on the roof that was tied in a ponytail at the side. He turned around and greeted the man who had called him teacher. The man who called this teacher turned out to be Brian Anhalt, who had come to the roof, because the girl was talking seriously to him. Young miss, what did he want to talk to her about? About the girl smiling awkwardly, telling him that she wants her bonus increase. Because he has 8 brothers and sisters who he supports alone, and some of his former classmates were in the hospital because they worked with him. Brian, so a raise would be an honest working condition. After Brian listened to it, he agreed. Because the girl has a strong will. It might not be much strength, but the girl endured well with such work. Only people who care about the world can love money. For example, a mysterious man from a cafe who is completely indifferent to everything that is part of their world. Brian starts a new call. He begged the indescribable ineffable to a mysterious god of unknown form. Inside, Brian was full of frustration and suffering, so he decided to take the opportunity to contact God. A man promises to conquer all good and evil. He only asked that he appear and fulfill his one and only secret wish. Then mist appeared all over the room, where a person's image is faintly visible. Shen Yi stood in the fog at the image of Brian in his mind. He asked that the person who called him have mercy on him, because he didn't know how to resurrect his daughter. The true buyer at heart content used to appeal to the creator of all things, the owner of a power that covered the entire world like a mist, whose power was immense. Shen Yi decided to play with him a little and asked him what he wanted the most. The man answered that most of all, he wanted greatness. As a mysterious god and his great knowledge, the youth from the mist said that his wish would surely come true. But this requires appropriate sacrifices. Brian rose from his knees and moved through the mist, shouting that he had brought a suitable offering as an offering. There is a ring, namely a Chinese lucky ring. If he puts it in the daytime, then luck will protect him. But if he wears it at night, then luck will turn away. Shen Yi received the ring, but it did not cause joy. It was made of silver. It would be better if they gave him money so he could pay for the water and electricity. So if necessary, he would just sell this ring. Brian and the young man both thought. Shen Yi thought about what to say to Brian, and the second in turn thinks about forbidden knowledge. What will be given to him this time? Here their reflections are interrupted by the cries of a young girl calling for her father. A blonde girl with green eyes. Brian is in a fog and tells him that he slept so long, had such a long dream, where he saw someone trying to wake him up. And through his sleep lasted so long that he was afraid not to wake up. But at one point he felt cold and finally he woke up. Shen Yi was very surprised by this arrangement, and the appearance of a mysterious girl named Eve, who he can't believe. That Brian can really bring someone back to life, how can he do it? Could it be that he was able to fulfill his wish thanks to the secret techniques from ancient books that Shen Yi taught himself? The man was still angry about how it happened, but the fact that Brian was able to bring someone back to life was only for his benefit, because he would believe that the true God was in front of him. The fire in the heart left without secret knowledge did not make him very happy. Eve came closer to him from behind saying that. He felt a very pleasant atmosphere, as if someone was watching him through this thick fog, and his soul became warm and calm. Brian starts to get angry because someone is watching Eve through the fog. The man decided to sacrifice his daughter to gain new knowledge, but then her daughter's fragile and graceful hand fell on her shoulder. Yang asked how he felt because he looked a little sick. Brian started crying, turning around and hugging his daughter. He apologizes to her for everything and swears that he will not let her be offended. He will. Don't let him be taken away again. The man turned to the creator of everything, the owner of a power that covers the entire world like another mist. This time he would definitely make a worthy sacrifice. Until then he asked to leave his daughter alone. Shen Yi did not accept that the man was furious because he only saw his daughter and did nothing wrong. The man from the mist turned to Brian and said that a few days ago the silent tongue gave him an invitation to join the team and conditions. Them to join was a relic that could bring misfortune. He never wanted to get involved with sectarians, but now, unfortunately, he had no choice. Shen Yi appears at a cafe and notes that his strength has grown, so he wondered what level he would reach in the end. Unfortunately, he still doesn't know how to use the ring Brian gave him as a gift, to tell him about the use of this ring. He decided that it was time to start looking for answers to his questions, and put on a cloak with an expensive Alice. It's not for nothing that they say that the more expensive the thing, the better. Shen Yi came out of the cafe where the rain was very heavy on the street, pouring like a bucket. The man went to the bus and reflected that during the last call, he managed to take some pictures. One of them showed a building out the window that probably should have been at the south end of the Berlin district. If Shen Yi remembers correctly that in the picture next to the wall, a glass bridge is installed on the observation deck. The land is divided into 4 large districts. The earthen fort was a financial and commercial center. In the West Berlin district there is Nolan's palace, the prime minister's residence, the parliament and government troops. The East District is an industrial and working-class residential area, and the South District is a mixed commercial, industrial, and residential area. Each district is separated by a large wall. If ordinary people wanted to leave the city and go beyond the erected walls, they had to apply to the government. It was still raining heavily outside, and Shen Yi thought that in such bad weather, only he decided to come to the wall and watch everything from it. Except his guess was that he was the only one who came here. It turned out that one of the black-haired girls with blue eyes and a blue raincoat was standing next to him. He watched the man and assumed that he was either a high school student or one of the world's saints. This was his first time seeing such a person. Shen Yi decided not to disturb the girl, because he had more important things to do. He took out his binoculars and started to look into the distance, choosing the right angle. He saw the large residence and staring at it. He suggested that Brian most likely had another personality. He would pretend to be a photographer for a long time to gather as much information as possible about the so-called victims. He would pretend that a beautiful scene was being created for him to film later, so that they would definitely not be able to reveal it. Brian summoned the god of space. If he revealed Shen Yi's identity, then he would just tell anti-magic investigator George about him. The girl who was with Brian on all his calls and who fainted every time the bus passed. The girl has many stops. The girl looks like a student, which means the bus has to stop at Baden University. That means Brian is probably connected to this lecture. He turned his full attention back to the girl standing next to him. This girl came here in this kind of rainy weather. Did he also have a secret recently? He became more suspicious because he started looking for tricks in everyone who was next to him. He, the black-haired stranger, noted that the powerful war from the Lord of Ashes came from the man, which raised his questions about who he was. Then George came up to him and greeted him as he was his new partner. Sulin is a university student. George says that Nolan's campaign has ended since he gave a high school student as a partner to exterminate demons. He said that with this arrangement he would have to retire early. The girl was angry with the guy's words and said that she was already a student. He was 17 years old, and thanks to his qualities, he transferred to college earlier than others. George insisted on his own, and said that he was still a high school student at that age, which was still angry. The girl says that she is a B-rank investigator, and before becoming an investigator, she gained 10 years' experience. Maybe he entered the Anti-Magic Bureau not too long ago. But George couldn't underestimate him because he was new. George smiled and said that wherever he went to school or college, there was important information he had to share for her, which was that this city was on the verge of collapse. This city will soon have a new summons in several sects in this city. In one of the churches, and this time, they decided to sacrifice something very expensive. Sulin stopped his speech and said that he would tell him the details, about the way George asked where he was going, and the girl said that she was hungry, and he must feed him. He was taken aback by the girl's words, and asking why she should feed him, he starts explaining first he is a senior investigator, and he is a beginner, so it was obvious that he had to invite him over and feed him well. Both his experience and rank salary bonuses and a number of other provisions were much higher and more than his. George, after listening to her, invites her to a cafe where he himself often goes. and at the same time introduced him to one person working there. The girl said that the most important thing is satiety and taste of food. Shen Yi took a bath and sang a song about his fondness for swimming. He said that later he should go to the library to find the book he needed. The man heard a scream from the cafe, which meant a visitor had come. The young man recognized George's voice and rejoiced because it meant money. Now Suline was looking towards the coffee shop when she heard behind her the cheerful voice of a man who was happy to see George. The girl stared at the young man standing in front of her, whose aura was stealing all the air in the room. Which is why it doesn't get into the lungs. He saw before him a vision of a red book with gold patterns. A house is burning, and people are screaming in pain in all this chaos. The prominent sword that was at the center of all Suline's actions spoke strange words, that if there is a chance, the best solution is to kill them all. What that girl was talking about was a mystery to Shen Yi. Shen Yi caught the attention of the young lady next to George. He said that he thought only adults were taken to the anti-magic bureau, and that the girl looked to be around 16 years old and she was studying in high school. Then argue with him. He said that he was a student. George scoffed at the girl's words and said that first year was almost the same as middle school. Other than that, he's only 17 years old, so there's no annoying difference. Su Lin, moreover, the investigator, said that because everyone had met each other. Then he can start a conversation about a past case related to finding someone by photo. Shen Yi said that there was a rule according to which to get the answer he needed to make an order, and since there were 2 people then 2 drinks, George agreed to the terms and ordered a latte. The girl decided to close and ordered a mousse cake, a chicken sandwich, a tiramisu milk cake, a freshly baked egg cake, a pasta donut, and 2 portions of each order. Shen Yi had taken note of the large order and asked the most important question. What kind of girl does he want? Said he didn't understand coffee, so he relied on the taste. Shen Yi said that he would prepare such coffee for him, which he will surely love and go to make. He was very happy with this arrangement because it meant that he would hit a big jackpot. George asked Suline why he ordered so much. He didn't want to eat it all, but the girl said that she would bring the rest. And investigators are still angry about why they ordered so much in a regular cafe. How much does it cost? And the girl says that she doesn't care because she takes care of it and pays out of her pocket. He is a ranking investigator. He has a salary of more than 99% of the country's residential population. The medical services, training trips, and all of this were free, and of course he would get paid extra for doing each additional task. So the girl said that today she can use the money given to her to do a mission, because they came to talk to the mysterious man. Yang's order was brought to them, and George asked Shen Yi about his last request. If there is any progress, he says that the whole town already knows about the big trouble that is coming for the town. The man asks, what exactly does he know? George says that they only know that there is some order that is wanted to sacrifice the whole city. And if this happened, there was no telling what the summoned space god would do. Even if this space god didn't have any ill intentions, how would ordinary people be able to react to his existence? And if the worst predictions are made, the world may be mired in chaos and agony. Shen Yi listened to his words, thinking that if they really summoned him, then how would this order sacrifice the entire city to him? If it is sacrificed on a large scale, then its identity can be revealed. Here he remembers that Aina said something about a new sacrifice, but just an Ash Chaos sequence obviously wouldn't be enough. He also mentioned that they were persecuted by an order called the Language of Silent. Are they right? Shen Yi asked George if he knew anything about the Language of Silent. George was taken aback by the young man's question because it meant that the man really knew too much. But he answered the question Shen Yi asked him. He said that there was a high probability that this order attacked investigators from the Anti-Magic Bureau. Because of this, the Bureau suffered huge losses, but they don't know what their real goal is. If they had nothing to do with the city's sacrifice, then it was calm and they could leave the matter with them for later. George took something out on the wrapper and said a lawyer recently said he would owe him a favor, so he decided to pay with something real. Shen Yi checked the gifts. Dan comes to the conclusion that if he accepts the gift, he is obligated to help him find Aina. So he said that he did not accept this gift. But George did not understand the reason for the refusal, and asked why he didn't take the gift. And the guy in turn replies that he guarantees that the girl with the photo is not a bad person. All he knew was that there was a conflict between the Order of Ashen Chaos and the Order of the Silent Language. Dan was very serious, and the young man said that all the information he provided to investigators is now free. George thanked Shen Yi for the information provided, and called the girl to tell her it was time for them to leave. Suline asked him to wrap his half-eaten food with her, but the man told him that their cafe did not provide such services, and said goodbye to him. It was raining outside for a day straight, and Shen Yi was heading to the library. He went to the toilet where put on a mask. He turns into a student in the library where he goes. There are 750,000 books containing answers to all kinds of questions. He entered a large library. Shen Yi walked between the rows of bookshelves and found the right shelf. The man decided to find records about the Order of the Ashes of Chaos, where he found a scripture that the sequence of Ashes of Chaos once succeeded in summoning the great Lord of Ashes. With his appearance, the whole earth shook. A raging sea of disaster started everywhere. After reading this part, he said that he was not capable of such a spectacular performance. He continued to read stories that said that, at that time, the status of the Order of Ashes was so great. So they overthrew the king. The next book he picked up was on the Order of Silent Languages, where it was indicated that at the beginning of the sacrifice the victims had to die, then they would attain peace. And silence means they have to kill all the residents of Belen. To perform the winter ritual of the god of winter space is a ghost of silence that ends in total extinction. Only by solving the problem of death would it be possible to make people put their whole soul into their belief. Here he was noticed by someone who called him Arthur. Namely, the student whose appearance he borrowed is called Arthur, and now he has to be on hospital leave. The person who called him turned out to be Brian.